Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 214. My name is Danny Beaumont. Thanks for joining today. You may be joining in one of two ways. One is by way of a Zoom screen share. If you're using that method, please go ahead and use the chat pod to ask questions. If you are joining by way of Facebook Live, I am going to keep an eye on the Facebook page as usual here. And if you want to ask questions as I go along, please just put it in the chat, actually in the comment section of the Facebook Live feed. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this is the Muse 101 session. If you're brand new to Muse, it's a great place to start. Adobe Muse has been shipping for about 6 years. I think it was in public beta for about a year before that. And there are quite a number of features in the application. If you're new to web design, as I mentioned, it's a great place to be. If you're familiar with web design, just acclimating to the Muse tool and how you can achieve things like scroll effects and truly full responsive design websites with unique content based on the device or the breakpoint that you've defined, we're going to cover that today. So this is part one of a two-part series. I've found that this session's a little too jam-packed for an hour, so we're going to go ahead and take our time and step through the process a little bit more slowly. I have produced a number of starter designs for Adobe Muse. If you are new to Muse, it's an excellent place for you to follow up after this session and try to implement some of the same things that I'm going to do today. This is one of those starter designs. It's called Kava, and it's a coffee shop, in essence, a small business website. If you would like to access this design yourself, there's a couple easy ways to get there. If I switch over to the Muse application, there's two tabs when you come to the landing page of Adobe Muse. And the first tab, the Work tab, shows you files that you may have opened in the past. Yours may be empty if you're new to Muse. There's a second tab to the right here that if you click on it, there are a number of tiles that appear. And one tile says get up and running fast with our starter files. So clicking on that is going to redirect you to a microsite, a site that we use on the Muse team to help communicate functionality, new features, events, and such. And that's at muse.adobe.com. But that link is going to take you directly to a section in the tutorials area where you can access one of the starter designs. So as I mentioned, I'm working on the Kava site here, and you can preview that finished design, and you can download the source content. When you hit the preview button, you are sitting through this session, but if you do want to have just a little bit more help, you'll notice in that preview area, I've gone in and actually included a number of little tooltip help videos that step you through really quickly how you can come through and customize a starter design for things like custom color swatches, custom text, and such. So in that preview, go ahead and click on the video link and you can learn more about how to customize the design. If you scroll to the bottom of this page, you'll notice there's a link here that says download the Kava starter design assets. So you can work with not only the Muse design, but the actual images that we're using in the site. If you'd like to use them to play with, they are freely available for you to work with. So with that site downloaded, you'll be able to follow along the work that I'm going to do. What we're going to do, though, is really take it from scratch. So I'm not even going to start with a starter design. I want to show you how, if you're approaching your own project, where you begin with the Muse tool. So let's start a little bit, though, with looking at the finished design and what our goal is as we build out this site. So the Kava site is an example of a small business website, a coffee shop that, we make it up. I tend to like coffee. I don't know what to say, but this is one of my favorite coffee shops in San Francisco. But notice that there are a few just kind of standard web truths about this site as we look at it. One is the name of the site, the logo there, Kava, allows you to navigate back to the home page of the site. And I have not published this out on the web, so the URL, I'm just previewing it actually on my local machine. That URL indicates that we're on the index page. When Muse renders a site, the first page in that site, so in the upper left-hand corner of a site plan, is going to be the index.html. I can navigate back here even though that home page is not in my overall navigation by clicking on the Kava logo. So if I go to the second page, I could click on Menu, which takes me to that menu page. And as usual, when I'm doing Facebook Live and recording my screen and using Muse and the web, things can get a little slow here. So we're going to let this guy load real quickly. Everything's suddenly slowed down, as demos will go for you. Come on, little web. Always happens when you have company, I'll tell you that much. Let's just see. Let's jump over to the location page, let that guy load. It's the demo gods. I've only been looking at this for the last 15 minutes. Okay, as it loads, I am looking at the Facebook Live session. As I mentioned, feel free to add any comments as we go along or questions that you have in the comment section, and I will take a look at them as we go. All right, well, in this basic design, let's see, let's take another approach. I'm going to go to that preview area that we just saw. So if I go to muse.adobe.com, it's another doorway to get to that place. And I'll go to the tutorials section. And I'm going to scroll on down to that starter design area and click on the Kava site. All right, this is already loaded in the browser. I think my local machine is struggling a bit using something known as localhost to preview the pages. But notice I can click on the menu page here. It takes me to that menu page. And I have items. If I want to go back to the main navigation, I've linked the logo to that home page. I also have a reservations page. So just to begin with, we're going to build out 4 pages on our site. The other thing I want to point out is that this is a fully responsive web design. So I can tell that by grabbing the edge of the browser. And when I press and drag, content is going to scale or resize or actually change, become very different based on the width of that browser. So as I press and drag here, notice that my containers here towards the bottom are starting to get a bit smaller and closer together. There comes a point where I was uncomfortable with the design being so squished, so to speak. So as the rule goes in Muse, when your design breaks, it's time to add a breakpoint. So this is now jumping to more of a tablet class of devices with 2 columns instead of the 3 columns, you'll notice as I drag back up. And as I press and drag, it'll continue. Notice I have navigation here to the top, but if I go to the smallest breakpoint, actually this guy just uses the same navigation even for phone. So in that smallest breakpoint, I can still access my pages, but I'm down to a single column on this particular page. So let's take it step by step. The first thing we want to do is we know the pages that we'll want with this site. Let's go ahead and create those pages in Muse. So by my count, we have a home page, which is this landing here. So if I click it, it takes me back to that home page where there's a full screen slideshow playing. I also have 3 additional pages: menu, location, and reservation. So I'm going to switch over to Muse, and I'm going to go back over to the Work tab in that landing area, and I'm just going to select Create New. Now, as you get started, Muse wants to encourage you to actually accept some of the defaults for creating a new page, but I can also go into my advanced settings here if I know more about what I want to produce and I want something different from that default. Notice I can come in and define whether or not that I want this site to use in its largest breakpoint, a fluid width breakpoint, or fixed width. The fluid width is what allowed me to bring the edge of the browser in and have the content dynamically change. Fixed width websites can also be used in responsive design, but you're not going to see things flow in that example. They're going to kind of jump between breakpoints. It's an approach that many hand coder web designers use, the fixed breakpoint methodology. In some ways, it makes your design easier. In other ways, it allows you to have a whole lot of breakpoints to adjust to a whole lot of displays. So I'm going to stick with fluid width for this design. If you're someone who likes to use a grid system, you can come in and go with something like a 960 grid, a grid structure. I'm going to stick with just one column for now. That's fine. And for the max page width, I'm going to go ahead and go up to 1200. I can always change my mind down the road, but I just want to start with a good desktop range. Sometimes I'll go 1400 depending on the content that I'm working with. The minimum width is defining that very smallest device, which would be the smallest smartphone at about 320. I can also set the minimum height for my pages. 500 is a fine default. If I am working with a grid system, I can adjust how that grid manifests. Here on the left, I have the ability to set resolution. This is a really interesting feature. I remember when it came out, I kind of was against it, and then I changed my mind because other people were more right about it. What it allows you to do is if you define something as a high DPI site for devices that can have Retina display or just high DPI, let's say on Windows, Muse will go ahead and serve up two sets of images. When someone loads a website, it's going to load the images at the standard resolution, and when the bandwidth is there, it will asynchronously bring in the higher resolution version of any individual image. So you'll get that first page. Let's say you're on an iPhone that's got terrible bandwidth, the network is really bad, but you've got a very high resolution Retina device. That first image will load, and only when the second image has loaded in the background will it refresh the page in a way that doesn't scroll the page at all. It just brings in the higher resolution. So high DPI is a nice way to work. You can read a tutorial on the Adobe Muse website, the microsite that I showed you, about how to set up your high DPI aspects to work within the design, but it's a good way to go. I'll go ahead and click OK. I'm going to leave mine as standard for now, even though it is a good way to go. And Muse now takes me into one of 4 workspace layouts. So I'm in that first workspace known as the plan mode. And this is where I get to think about the pages that I want to work with and any content that might reoccur across pages. So by default, I've got a home page here, that very first page. And this is the one that in the browser will come up as index.html because it's there in that leftmost position. Now I can rename that. I might decide I want to call this landing. It really doesn't matter because as we know, it's not going to show up in the navigation. It'll just be the page that we go to when you click on the logo. We do want to add the other pages. So as I recall, if I click the plus sign here, I can add menu. I can also come in and add, let's see, we'll go back and cheat, location and reservation. Location, and I can also use a keyboard command, Shift Command P for the next page for reservation. And I'll click return. You'll notice that I have those pages here at the top. Of course, this is not all caps and it's not going to show up, but it's bugging me, so I'll go ahead and do this. You'll notice that by definition in the site plan, there's 2 sections here. There's a master page section and then individual pages. The team that originally built Adobe Muse was the same team that built InDesign. So Muse in many ways is a layout application that allows you to lay out content for the web, similar to the way InDesign does for print. So many of the metaphors that you might be familiar with if you've used InDesign in the past will carry over to the Muse application. Okay, now that we've got our pages set, let's look at the next level of kind of navigation elements we'd like to work with. So as I press and drag this page, you can pretty well see that there's a couple of elements that are showing up on the page. I've got up towards the top that logo. And as I press and drag the edge of the browser, notice that the logo kind of moves for a while, and then it gets to a fixed position and stays. The navigation on the right also stays put for a while, and then when it hits a certain edge, it starts to move into position. Now I use a tool, it tends to work pretty well, but not perfectly. It's something called breakpoint for Chrome, and it lets you know how big your breakpoint is in the browser as you work. So notice as I press and drag the edge of the browser here, I'm at about 1400 pixels. Notice where that Kava logo is. It's fine, it's going to move, and it keeps moving until it hits pretty much probably that 1200 pixel breakpoint. Just as I hit 1200 pixels, it starts to not move. This is some of the features or capabilities when you're defining responsive elements that are pinned or fluid in their behavior. So let's go ahead and get this guy. All right, good. That's great. I'm able to keep an eye on chat on the side here. So it looks like folks are being pretty good making feature requests. You're welcome to do that. I could take questions towards the end. I'll give you some of the hard truths if you'd like. But we'll keep this guy up and running off in the corner so it doesn't get in the way too much. But that's nice. Makes it easier than looking at my phone to keep an eye on any comments or questions that you have. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so as we're working here and I press and drag, we actually are honored by the presence of this guy, Ali Pordelli. So he is a designer and a widget developer. He actually was the visual designer that created this site with me. So welcome, Ali Pordelli. Okay, so we've got navigation that's to the left and the right for those pages. If I click into the menu page, what you'll notice is that navigation's still there. It didn't really change. It is present, as is the Kava logo. But as I scroll down on the page, I have footer elements that didn't appear on my main page. So when you think about master page elements, you'll want to build out a master for any content that tends to reoccur across a number of pages. And it behaves a little bit like a symbol metaphor. When you come in and make changes on that page, it's going to propagate to any individual page that has those changes included. So I have a master page set with all of this footer content, and it applies to all of these 3 pages, but not the first page that we designed. So location, you'll notice, has the same footer, as does reservation. Let's go on in and start to make some of these things happen. So we've got the Kava logo. I'm going to show you a couple other little tricks. There's a session I do which is basically building a website in 60 minutes or less that already exists out on the web. If you have a client who has a site that's already live and they want you to make changes to that site to take it forward, it's possible to use Muse to rebuild a site without having either coding skills or the source application that was used originally. And there's kind of tricks for doing that. There is a jam session that I've done that kind of shows you some of the best practices there. But one is to try to understand what typefaces are being used. So notice here I have something called what font. And if I then come over and click on an item, I can easily see what typeface is being used for the logo here. So it's called Estilo Pro, and it's at certain point sizes and such. So we're going to go in and create that logo as we work now. So Estilo Pro is something to keep in mind. So back within the Muse application, what I want to do is at least get that navigation towards the top of my page going. And if you remember, the landing page and the 3 interior pages all had that same master navigation page, that top nav at the top of the page. What I want to do is come here to this master page and double click on it. And I'll zoom out a bit. So this master page is going to be a page that will keep everything that I define on it and apply it to individual pages. So what I want to do is get a menu on that page. And one of the nice things about Muse is that there are something known as widgets, and widgets are common web behaviors that can be configured and styled for your particular website. And I'd like to use a widget for that. Menus are very laborious to build out by hand, and they can be easily automated. I'm going to begin, though, by looking at some of the guides that are here on the left. So there are individual guides. If you roll over them, they'll explain themselves. Again, this is kind of where the page layout print metaphor meets the web. So it kind of looks like a piece of paper. I have the ability to come in and grow the height of my default page. I can press and drag a footer area. And the idea here is that any active page content is going to sit above the footer that I might define. Now we know on that main master that there's actually not a footer, it's just a big slideshow. So we're probably not going to rely on that for the main page, but the interior pages we will. And that header area, I can drag this line down a little bit as well. I now want to go over into the widget library, and I want to select the menu widget. So I'll come into the menu section, and I'm going to press and drag that onto the canvas, and I'll release. Now, right out of the box, something interesting happened. It automatically knew the pages that I had defined in my site plan. So they're here on the page. And if I actually drag this somewhat into position and then close out the master page and go back to the site plan, what you can kind of tell at a glance here is that the navigation has applied to all the pages because they're all leveraging this A master page. You can also see that there are some default states or styles associated with it. So I can see that each page has an active state for that menu item, letting me know what page I'm on. So if I double click, I can see by the darker color that this is the menu page. I'll go ahead and close that back out again. And I want to come in now and style out our master a little bit. So to do this, I've got a bit of a tricky challenge with this design. As you'll know, there's an image up here, and there's a logo, and there's white text on top of it. So to demonstrate this just for us right now, I'm going to come on in and just give myself a bit of a rectangle. So I'll press and drag that rectangle. With it still selected, I'm going to come into this resize area here and set that rectangle to stretch the width of the browser. And with it still selected, I can see it selected by looking in the upper left-hand corner here. I'm going to change the fill color just to something to make it easier for me to see what's going on. So that's a bit of an intense gray. Let's try to lighten that up a little bit. And I'll just give it just a different bit of a shade so that I can see what's going on. I'll then click off and come back into my workspace. You'll notice my menu is gone. So I'm going to select this item and right click and go ahead and bring it to the back, send to back, so that I can see the layer that's above me. If I prefer, I can always use the layers panel, which will show me what's going on in this area. Now I've got that header content there, but I want to style it out using a different typeface. So we can sneak back over to our goal here and just click on the menu there, and I can see that it's using Muse Sans 500. So let's talk about text now within Muse. There are a number of different worlds, and if you have grown up with the web, you'll probably be familiar with them. If you're brand new, you'll just be confused as to why there are so many choices. But there's something known as system fonts. And system fonts are the ones that are on your machine. And those can be terrific. You may have thousands of fonts that you've used in the print world. Well, those fonts, when rendered on the web, are going to convert to images. So it's kind of like rasterizing text in Illustrator, which can be a good idea, but it's very resolution dependent and it can become very large. But system fonts, there are thousands of them, and you can work with them. There's also something known as a web-safe font, or I even forget what we renamed it. If I come into the font menu, let's just take a look here for a second. So I'll go ahead and click on the text panel here. And in the drop-down, we have what I talked about, the system fonts, which are everything you have on your machine, and then standard fonts. So these used to be known as web-safe fonts. They are roughly available on just about every device, Mac and Windows, iOS devices, Android devices, but notice that they have what's known as fallbacks. So Georgia might be available, but if it wasn't, I would fall back to Palatino Linotype, or just anything that's a serif font. It's not a great experience. It's very limited. So what Adobe has done, actually about 7 years ago, is we acquired a company called Typekit. And Typekit has taken thousands of typefaces, optimized them for the web, and found a way to serve them up as vector content, as resolution-independent content. And those are known as web fonts. So I think we're looking for Muse Sans. I want to go find that in the Typekit world of web fonts. So notice I have web fonts here, and I can come in and add new ones. So when I click on that Add button, it allows me to come in and shop around for fonts. And as I mentioned, there's a good deal of legacy here. Google has something known as Google Web Fonts. We rebranded it as Edge Web Fonts and then basically did not get rid of that brand when the Edge product offering went away. So those are there. There's about 600 open source typeface fonts that you can work with. But Typekit, as I mentioned, has thousands. So you can search across all your foundries if you just type in some of the letters that you're looking for. So maybe it's MUS, Museo. There we go. And then I can see what is available. So notice I've got a number of Museos here. We've got Museo Sans, Sans Round, and Slab. I'm welcome to check each one that I'd like. I can also click in to see each of the individual weights associated with that family. If you did grow up in the world of the web, you don't have to be afraid when creating a site and including a family of fonts. If I select the Museo Sans Condensed family, even though there are 10 weights here and I'm only going to use one, it doesn't hurt me to import the entire family. I can do that, but Muse is going to only embed the weight that I actually use in the design. Now that I've done this, I tend to get caught up in a little loop there. It's going to try to do that one more time. I'm going to try to speak today too. So I'm going to add web fonts. We're going to go back into Museo, and I'm going to check the box there, which will include that in this project. When I click OK, Muse actually pulls that down out of the Typekit cloud and creates a runtime instance on my machine. Now, this is not in my system folder. It's not going to show up in Illustrator and Photoshop. It will just show up within Muse. But the good news is if I share this file with you, when you open up the file without going to fetch that font, any typeface that is actively being used within Muse that is in the cloud will dynamically download and become available. So that's kind of nice. I'll go ahead and click OK, if we can remember what the heck we were doing here. And I will zoom out a bit. I want to work with this menu now. Now, if you remember, there are a number of states that indicate when it's an active page or a non-active page. I can take a look at those states by here in the menu, kind of clicking on that item. So let's say I click on landing. See how it says menu item now? And I can take a look at the different fill colors and fonts that are being used to differentiate between all of these states. Everything on the web can have pretty much 4 different states. You've got normal or up. You've got roll over when you roll the mouse over. When you click is a down state. And then active is the one that's actively being invoked, so the active page. These are all great as a teaching tool, but as Terry White says, the Muse team makes them so unattractive, you're forced to have to redesign them, which I believe is pretty true. So I want to take away all the noise that's here. I have a very subtle approach going on in the live site, and I want to use that. So I'm going to come here and right-click, and I'm going to select Clear All Styling. I now end up with something that's really pretty rough. It doesn't even have a font associated with it. So with that selected now, I'm going to go to my text panel again and check out little Museo. I should have that. There you go. There's Museo Sans Condensed. We'll go ahead and select the 500 weight. And I'm going to bring the point size up a little. I'm going to type T on the keyboard. That gets me to my text controls a little more easily. And I'll just size it up a little. I could go and match it exactly to the template site, but this is good for now. So I now have these pages set, and I'd like to actually have an active state when you are selecting the live site. So with this widget selected, now I'm going to click a second time to get on just the landing bit. Normal is good. Rollover is fine. Mouse down as well. I could come in and actually let's go ahead and do this. For the rollover state, I may just come in and say, go ahead and lighten it up. So let's change the opacity to about 80% when you're rolling over that item. Pretty subtle. We've got normal, and then rollover is a little more light. For the active state with it selected, I'm going to come on in and actually just underline the item. So I've got now 3 different rather subtle states. Normal is plain, rollover is a little lighter, and then active has the underline indicating it's the active state. So now that I've done that, let's go ahead and go back to the site plan. I can click on plan here on the right. I can click on just where it says website there on the left, but it takes me back out, and I now have all of those changes applied to each of these pages. This is how I eat up 2 whole hours. We've gotten through menus, and we're about 20 minutes in. So Let's try to speed up just a little bit. This is going to be my landing master. So I'm going to come in and double click on this and give it a name. We'll just call it landing. I want to now create a second master that inherits the elements that I've got here, but adds additional elements. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and click the plus sign. I'm going to call this one interior. And I'm going to right click on it and tell it to inherit the main one, the landing page. Notice that it's now applying those same elements from the left item to the right. I can come in though and add additional components. Let's go back to our finished design. I'm going to do a lazy move here, not with what's the font here, but I'm going to just grab some of this text for my footer elements. It's not critical, but I want to just show you how we're doing this, lest I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Sorry. I'm just being lazy and don't want to type it out. Let's just copy that bit. And I'll come to this area. And I'm going to add that as a footer item. And in your case, of course, it'll probably have an address or some details about how to go to a certain location. I'm going to come in and just set this as centered text, and I'm going to apply that same Muse Sans font. So Muse Sans condensed will stay with the same weight. And I'm going to place it towards the center. Notice that I get smart guides as I get close to that center. And I'm going to bring it down into my footer area and just drag that footer area down a bit. So if I go back now to my site plan, I have those footer elements on the interior pages, but not my main page. One other thing you'll notice is that the navigation on the pages, it says landing here. And if we remember, I kind of made a whole point about how Kava takes you to the home page, but it doesn't say landing in the navigation. Let's go in and see how we can take care of that. So here on that main page, I'm going to go ahead and add the logo. And I will not worry about the typeface right now. K-A-H-V-E. I've spelled it wrong, Ali Pordelli. And we'll give it Muzio for the moment. Now that you know how to get fonts of your own. Did I do that as italic? I did. Okay. I can come in and space it out a little bit if I'd like as well. Let's see, we'll give it a little bit of tracking and get it into position. So I'm going to place it now here on the right-hand side. And what I'd like to do is have that be a link that takes you to a home page. So really quickly, the way that I can define that as a link is to select the item. And in the control panel here, there is a section for hyperlinks. Try that again. Where I can come in and say, you know what, make sure you go to the landing page whenever anybody clicks on that logo. The next thing I want to do is get rid of the words landing. So the way I can do that is to come back into the site plan. And where it says landing here, this is a bit tricky. It's not the easiest to find. I can right click on that thumbnail for that page. Under menu options, I can exclude the page from the menus. So I want the page to exist. I want it to be there, but I don't want it to show up in the menu. Notice I can do other things, like I can include the page, but when you click it, instead of dynamically rendering a hyperlink, I can have it go to a totally different location. I'll select that first option, which effectively takes it out of the navigation. Notice that I have 3 items now. I can come on in and even check the spacing on these guys, tighten them up just a little bit as we go along. All right, I got to cover a lot of ground here. Next thing I'm going to do is pull down on File to save my site so that we've got a nice working version of this in case we need it. Call it Kava Jam, not Kava Ham. Okay. Next thing I want to do now is come in and change these elements so that they will show up when we have a darker background. So I'm going to select the menu and such, type T on the keyboard, And for the color of the item, I'm going to set that to white. That's interesting. Let's try to go a little deeper. So I'm going to go a second time, type T, make sure that I'm at that root level. That's pretty interesting. It looks like it wants to be white already. All right, we're going to leave it alone for the moment and swing right back in here. So let's go to our goal site here again. The next thing I want to do is on the landing page, there is an image that is rotating in the background. And if I resize the page as well, notice that there's just a simple previous and next button that takes you through each of those changing images. This is using a widget known as a very simple slideshow widget. So if I come back to Muse and I come into my landing page and I double click, I want to add that slideshow here. So to do so, I'm going to go to the widget directory, widget library, and I'm going to go into slideshows. And I can choose one of a number of slideshows here. For the most part, all of these are the same widget configured in different ways. I know that I want a full screen slideshow, so I'll go ahead and select that one by pressing and dragging it onto the canvas. And the first thing you'll notice is that that image kind of grows to fill the entire space. It's done that by this checkbox here for full screen slideshow. But I'm going to go ahead and delete some of the elements that I don't want. Now, the way widgets work is that I mentioned they're configurable and stylable. So when a widget is selected, there's a little blue flyout here. If I click that flyout, there's options that I have. So I can come in and say, you know what? I don't want a counter there. I do want previous and next. And I don't want anything else like thumbnails. I could choose to show thumbnails up. It's a lot of fun to play with widgets and familiarize with the different options. I'm going to go ahead and just drag this guy down. I'm going to come into my master. You may have noticed that I was bumping into my footer area, so I'm going to bring that footer line all the way to the bottom. And when I come now back to that page, I can drag my previous and next button towards the bottom if I'd like. And I've got a nice main image here. Well, this looks nothing like my Kava design, and you'll notice that my navigation is also layered behind my active content. So let's go in and take a look at that. Let's see. Got this guy here, and I'm going to go ahead and send it to the back. Allows my Kava logo to show up here. The next thing I want to do is come in and change those images. So I'll just go ahead and click in this flyout panel and notice that I can add images and browse for those images. So let's pop over. As I mentioned, the starter design includes the images with it. So you can come into the assets folder if you've downloaded those and get those yourselves. I'm going to grab a few of these background images. Let's say 1, 2, 3. We can do 4. And I'll click open. And those are automatically imported into the design. What you'll notice is they're also automatically deleting those black and white for position only images. So I now have my Kava logo and I have my background. If I want to stop and look at my work as I go along, you can always check your work in a number of ways. The first, if you just for your own self want to see how you're doing, I can pull that on File to preview the page in the browser. Muse will render HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I can see the Kava logo. I'm not sure where my navigation's gone on me here, but I can navigate now forward and backwards between those images, and it's a full screen slideshow, so it's going to resize. Notice the Kava logo is also resizing, but it's going to resize dynamically. And that's probably what's going on with my menu here. Because I'm working on a responsive design, I have to be careful about how I place and work with each of the elements. So let's kind of go in and troubleshoot a little bit. That Kava logo, I want to come in and change it to be white for sure. So I'll change that. And I want it to stay in the corner at 1200 pixels. So to do that, I can come in and pin it. Now there's different pin behaviors. If I want it to always stay up at the top and not scroll up and down in my design, I'm going to use browser level pinning. For responsive pinning, where objects move up and down on the screen but are fixed in a certain left to right, I can use responsive pinning. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the browser level pinning, which will keep that right up there in the corner. And I want to find out where the mystery of my menu is here. So this menu right here is kind of being funny. I'm going to back out of this. I'll be honest, I'm running a beta version of this tool. Now let's try to not throw it away yet. Not sure why it's misbehaving. So another thing I'm going to do is make sure that it is also pinned in location. So I'm going to pin it in relationship to this corner of the browser. And type T on the keyboard. See how that's spooking me there? That should be white text. And it is not. Let's give it a color. How about orange? Now you're orange. Question is, are you white? Now you're white. Okay. I don't know why I wasn't speaking so kindly to me before. But now that I've set that to white, I'm going to go ahead and leave this alone for now. Let's just see. Thinking to myself, come on out here. We're in pretty good shape, but we still have a layering problem going on. Let's take a look at that. If I come into my master page, you want to think about the hierarchical structure of your page. And I'm about to take questions for a second here because I know I'm kind of going on. But in the hierarchical structure, I want things like my navigation to be always at the top of the page. And then if I have images on a page, I want that to be sandwiched in the middle. And then any footer items that I have, I want to stay to the bottom and below my other active content. So let's go ahead and adjust some of my layers accordingly. If I come into the layer panel, I see I've got a default layer 1, and that has all of the elements that we've defined. I'm going to come in and go ahead and name this top. And it's going to include my top navigation elements. I want to add a second layer, and I'll call that page. Now these are going to shoot across all the pages on my site. And we'll do a third, and we're going to call it footer. And then I need to do a little reordering. I want page to be below the top nav, and I want footer to be below all of that. And for the elements I have, this is where I'm going to be a little tricky. This rectangle, I really don't need it for anything except to be able to see my navigation. I'm going to move it to, let's just move it to the page layer. So what I do is select an object and right click. Under move to layer, I'm going to move that down to that page layer. The top layer, we're good, and the footer, there's no content there yet. Let's see if that helps us out a little bit. I'm going to go back to the site plan and come on into my landing page. And I know what's going on here. Let me just see. Yeah, it's funny. This is funny to me. I'm going to select my page content where I have the slideshow. And I'm going to go ahead and move that to the new layer. Pretty interesting. Grab this guy, and I'm going to move it down to the page layer. There we go. So because I moved the slideshow down into that lower layer, it's allowing my top navigation to be visible. I'll make sure that the Kava logo, which is there on that top layer, is in good shape. And then my menu items are also in good shape. In fact, we can take this logo. Let's go ahead and delete it from this individual page. So I'm going to cut it. And back here in my main master here, I'm going to go ahead and paste it in place, which is going to make sure it goes to that right spot. And I'm going to make sure that it is white and not black. Okay. So we've got just some beginning elements going on. We've got navigation at the top. We've got it pinned in a way that will allow it to behave well. And we've got a slideshow that plays in the background that I can come in and customize and configure. So notice all the other options I didn't touch on here. Does it transition? Does it automatically play? Does it stop if you click on it? There's just lots and lots of power to these built-in widgets as we go along. All right, I'm going to swing over now to check out how you guys are doing on chat a little bit. So if you have questions and you're following me on Facebook Live, go ahead and throw that into the comment section. I'm going to take a look real quick. So Lucia, yes, I haven't done the multiple breakpoints yet. I'm heading that way. Ollie's getting into tech support. I appreciate that, Ollie. Again, some feature requests, which is good. Thanks for the compliments. It's hard talking to yourself, you know. What do we say? 214 times. This is the 214th recording. Okay, I'm going to keep going and stay on task. Let's see. Okay, so we've got that first page pretty well set. I can come in and customize these to be more attractive. By default, they have just a bit of text in here. So it is a font that I can change. Notice I changed the next little arrow and the previous arrow adjusted as well. Some truths about widgets or elements that are sibling sets is when something known as edit together is checked. Anything I do to one item in that set is going to apply to the other item. It can be handy, but it can be maddening if you wanted to have a difference there. You'll want to uncheck the edit together part. All right, so let's keep going a little bit. We're going to go back now to our main design. And let's start to look at the menu page. I'm going to go look at the finished design and see what we got going on there. Let's see. On the menu page, it's a pretty straightforward page. It's got a couple of elements that I do want to talk about. There's an image in the background that you'll notice is set to scale to fill the container. So as I press and drag here, that image is scaling. This is a responsive behavior that we've always had in Muse. When you define background fills, you can set them to scale. So it's not really reflecting multiple breakpoints yet. I haven't really gone in and done that. Let's go ahead and jump over and talk about breakpoints so that we can get started with that before we probably end up having to switch over to part 2 of this recording, which will be in 2 weeks. So let's indeed talk about breakpoints. Here I am, as I mentioned, I'm bigger than 1200, so elements are kind of stopping at the 1200 point. The Kava logo is really stopping at about 1200. As I press and drag, I can tell when I get right to that 1200 point, both the content on the left and the right are going to start to move in a little bit. See how they're, on the left it doesn't resize, that's how browsers work, but on the right it's going to resize and move in until I hit a break point. And that's where I decided that the navigation was getting a little crowded. I'm starting to move into tablet classes of devices. So I created a new breakpoint with a new layout, specifically for devices that are that size or smaller. Now, folks will say, how do you know which breakpoint you need to have? What about tablets, iOS devices, Android devices? The truth is there are so many devices. You no longer can really define breakpoints for particular devices. You'll go mad. The resolution of the device, the browser that they're using, the size and height and width, make it such that if you have an iPhone 7 Plus, when you hold it up in a portrait mode, it's considered a phone. If you turn it sideways, it actually falls into the class of tablet devices. Even though it's a phone and a big phone, it's just something different. So I think as a designer, if you can stop thinking about specific devices and start to think about your content and make sure that the content always looks good from the very largest breakpoint to the smallest breakpoint, you'll understand the mindset from Muse. So as I'm here within the application, I want to work on navigation. So we're back here on the page, kind of as boring as this page is looking. But as we know, we've got we've got a menu here on the right, and I can go ahead and set the way this menu is aligning a little bit if I choose to. So it's set right now to have a uniform size. I can make the space between each element the same by using uniform spacing. It's kind of up to you as to how you want to handle it. I kind of like that approach. It's saying that the space is going to be the same. So if the title is smaller, it's going to have a smaller container based on the letters, not on consistent spacing. So that's good if it's not a button behavior. With that set, It's, as we know, aligning to the upper left-hand corner of my site. Notice there's little arrows here. If I don't click those arrows, that's what says to the web design, basically, the website, that anything larger than 1200, this should not move. If it hits 1200, it's going to start to pin to the corner of the browser. But anything greater than 1200 will just stay put. You can experiment with that if that's confusing. It takes a while to understand. But I have that content pinned there, and I'm just going to press and drag until I get to about the class of tablet devices, or when I feel like my design's getting really smushy. Notice what's happening to my Kava logo. It's kind of falling apart. So the way I'm scrubbing here is simulating that browser behavior, and it's a good way in the design canvas before you have too much complexity in the design to see how it will work in the browser. If I want to jump back out to a breakpoint, I can click on the breakpoint bar and it jumps me back out. For the Kava logo, when I click on it, it is indeed pinned to the upper left-hand corner of the site, which is great. But notice that in the responsive drop-down here, the text is set to have a fluid width behavior. That means that as the container, as the breakpoint is made smaller, that container is going to scale and become smaller as well. I don't want that in any way for my logo. So what I'm going to do is, with the item selected in the drop-down, I'm going to set the fluid resize to none so that it's hardwired so it does not change. Now when I press and drag, the logo's not going to clip, it's not going to scale. It's just going to really stay its original size. But when I get to about a range that I'd like to go ahead and go with tablet, I'll press and drag until I get to that place. We can go with, let's say, 900. I'm going to drag the breakpoint to that place, and then I'll click the plus sign. Now you notice I did it 898. If I want to be precise, I can always right-click and go back to the breakpoint properties and set that for 900 and hit return so it's more accurate. I now have a second breakpoint. And with that second breakpoint, I can make some rules here. I can decide that this should move out a little bit. I could tighten up my navigation because I know I'm headed towards phone and I might run out of space. I can make a ton of changes here. I can actually hide this menu and go with something known as a hamburger menu if I want to have more of a mobile menu for my tablet device. Because I'm here on that breakpoint, I can make these changes. Let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to press and drag until I start to get to about a phone class of devices, or when things are just getting too crowded. So I'm comfortable to about that point with the navigation. I'm going to add a third breakpoint. And what I'll do in that third breakpoint instance, I'll drag this down just for reference. And I'll go ahead and have my header move down on that mobile device. And I'm going to move my menu now here. I want it to center in the design, so I'm going to hit that responsive center breakpoint. And for the Kava logo, I'll move that into position. I'm going to type T on the keyboard so that I can center it. And then I'm going to hit escape to get out of the text attributes so that I can then, how about type V on the keyboard to get to a pointer? Just showing you shortcuts as we go along here. But I'm going to select that Kava logo and I'm going to pin it to the center as well. So if we jump back, and I want to jump back, I can click on the breakpoint. I see the Kava on the left, the menu. Let's go ahead and move this over just a little bit more. When I go to a tablet, things are a little tighter, but they're still in position. Click a third time, I can go to the phone layout where they're stacked on one another. Now, if I want to take a quick look at what I've done, because this is a lot of subtle changes, preview in browser is your friend. It happens very quickly, and it really gives you a sense of what you're doing as you're designing. So I've made those changes to the landing page, which is applied here. If I double click now on my main page and pull down under File to preview the page in the browser, it's going to render the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this is a real live web page that I can press and drag and see its behavior. So notice how things are looking good. I'm running on a pretty small monitor, so it's hard to get too much bigger than 1200. I'm at 1400. Let's check this too. Actual size, yep. So I can come along, and when I hit that next breakpoint, it's hard to tell what the background image is changing, but if I hit that next breakpoint, there we go. Things change a bit. down to the smallest breakpoint, and there is my phone navigation. Now you'll notice that my arrows are kind of falling off the page. That's not so great. So I'm going to take a look at that now. We've gone in and set the breakpoints on the master page, but you'll notice here on the individual page, I have an indication of those breakpoints. I can see by these arrows that the master page has breakpoints, but they haven't necessarily come over to this individual page. I don't have the breakpoints for the other elements on the design. You can decide if you want to have the same breakpoints on a per page basis. The navigation, the top and the bottom, will always respect that. That's easier to explain in person a little bit as we go along. But I want to come to the previous and next buttons that I have here, this previous and this next button. I want to kind of do that same behavior with resizing. I don't want it to resize, so I'm going to set it to none. And location-wise, I can make some choices here. I may want to have it inset just a little bit so it aligns better. This is where Ollie, who's the real designer, groans because I'm just the product manager. He makes things attractive. So I'm just going to line that guy up there to the left. But I also want it to actually pin, and I want it to pin to the bottom corner of the site. So with these two items selected, I'm going to pin to that bottom corner. And then I'm going to use a shortcut this time, Shift-Command-E, and preview that page in the browser. And I'm starting to get some nice behaviors. Notice that previous and next is looking really big for a phone, but it's staying in the design. See how it moves up? I'm going to make it smaller for it to be more attractive. But if I press and drag and go to that tablet device, my navigation stays in sight as well as my larger page. All right, I've sucked up a whole lot of time on some of these introductory concepts, which is why it's a two-part series. I want to switch back to the comments and see if I can answer some questions. And I want to just encourage you guys, come on back 2 weeks from today. I do this every other week on Wednesdays. And we're going to pick up where we are. We've got some basics in place. We're going to pick up and cover more of how to build out this site. So looking at questions that are here, as I mentioned, there are some feature requests, which we could talk about, and just some comments. Hey, Jay, I'm actually in Washington, D.C. myself. I moved here not that long ago, so we're neighbors. Will Muse ever allow HTML to get removed from the URLs? It's not on the plans right now. So Mitchell, question for you. Are you looking for PHP pages, or you just don't like HTML in the URL? You can request features. There is a place where we're working on future development. If you, in your browser, point to Muse pre-release.com, it will redirect you to the Muse pre-release program where you can kind of jump in and put your voice out there for features that you do want to see happen, and give us more information for something like why the HTML would not be in the URL. Bob's asking for tables. I hear you. I'm a big fan of some of the widget developers, folks like Ali Pordelli of Cookie.com, Muse Themes as well. They have some really nice table widgets that allow you to use Google Sheets to build out the table attributes, and it populates on the page. We have not done it. Engineering groans about the complexity of implementing responsive tables natively into Muse, but I'm with you. I'd like to have them. But I don't have a promise for you for when you'd get it too quickly. Peter's here, which is good. Let's see. I'm glad everybody's here. Bob wants more Typekit fonts. I don't know why you're limited to some fonts on your computers. Do you have an enterprise account? I've not heard of a limitation around Typekit fonts. That's really new to me. So maybe you can explain a little bit more about that, Bob. It's not something that I've heard. Annette had to go away, but the answer is yes. This is available later. If you search for Danny Beaumont, I have a YouTube channel, and I do record these sessions so that you can replay them. They're also linked in the events section of muse.adobe.com, so you can find the recordings after that time. How do you create widgets, asks Freddie. I don't know if Ollie answered that for you. But if you go to GitHub and search for Adobe Muse, there is a GitHub repository that explains how to create widgets. They're very straightforward to create. They use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Ali, along with many of the other widget developers, started as a Muse user, understood the power of widgets, and went into the business of building out widgets. He's a pretty smart coder and visual designer, but lots of folks make widgets. There are over 1,400 widgets. Let me kind of show that for a minute. If you again go to muse.adobe.com and then navigate to the widget section, there are over 1,400 widgets here. We do not sell widgets. We do not make any money with widgets. Third-party folks do, but there are a number of vendors and there are a number of widgets. So lots of folks that are making them. Some of the big partners make many and some smaller ones make less, but some are free. You can always filter for all of the free widgets that are out there. And whether or not it meets your requirements, I'm not certain, but you can come in and at least explore the widgets that are out there, and then consider actually buying some. Some cost $5. Some you get with a membership to some of the broader template and widget folks. But I think it's a real value to extend the tool in that way. All right, I'm going to swing back because I'm at the top of the hour, but see if I can answer just a few more questions until we come back again. What do you think, the new sound booth? I'm kind of enclosed in this funny little sound enclosure. It's a little claustrophobic, but not too bad. I think it makes the sound quality good. Will there be a custom widget for custom scroll bars for text and images? Some of the third-party folks, Justin, do offer that. We do not. It's not a built-in Muse feature. But there are definitely some of the widget providers that allow you to hide horizontal or vertical scroll bars to customize the way they appear, customize your cursors. Randall likes the sound, which is good. Well, let's go ahead and end it at this point. I saw one more question actually in Zoom, so let me check that real quick. Is there any guidance on, okay, there's a couple questions. Is there any guidance on image size for full width images for slideshows? You know, it's a really good question, Peter, and it's a bit of a complicated answer. And let me just dive into this for a second at the expense of confusing folks. When I'm in Muse, I'm just going to do this really quick, and then we'll stop. But if I come in and I just create a brand new site, right? So really quick, and I want to work with images. If I come in and I just place an image, so I double click on it and I press and drag that image, I may say, you know what, at this breakpoint 960, I want this image to scale or resize, such that when you press and drag, see how it's getting smaller? Muse has a lot of information about what you want in this example, because I'm saying take this image and define its max size. I can come in and play with the mask a little bit. I can change how it's positioned. But I'm defining the largest it's ever going to be pretty much. And Muse knows to look and see the resolution of that image and the browser, and it may subsample. If this was an incredibly large image, some 10 megapixel, very large image that I imported that would load badly on the web, Muse is going to know to subsample that to web resolutions. On the other hand, if I come in and I draw a container, let's say I press and drag a container here, and I define it to be the full browser width. And with that item selected, I then go into the fill panel and I grab one of those images. So I go with this guy right here. I can define the way this image resizes in a really powerful way. So notice I've got under fitting original size. I can say scale to fill the container, and I can define an anchor point from which that scaling behavior exists. So if I zoom out a little bit here and come on in and resize this guy, as it's scaling, I get some nice control about the way that scaling behavior happens. I defined its pinpoint. Now, this is where life gets tricky, because we're asking Muse to deal with an image, and with scale to fill defined, come on in and take the resolution of that image. When I go in to preview this in the browser, I might be here where everybody's good and it's small, but because this guy is scaling to fill, it's going to continue to get bigger and bigger I'm going to even fake out a little bit here, which may confuse you. If I zoom out, it's acting as though my monitor is much, much bigger. So let's assume I'm on a 50-inch, 100-inch monitor. Notice how this is going to continue to scale, whereas this guy is not. What happens is Muse cannot trim or limit the size of an item that is put as a background fill and is set to scale to fill the container, because we don't know how large it's going to be. So in that instance, you do want to carefully look at the size of your background fill and make sure that it's reasonable within range. You don't want to put something really, really large, because Muse is not going to make that smaller. And it will have a heavier load time. The last thing I will say, though, is if you're working and you know that you need a really large image for desktop, but as you come down, perhaps you want to say that, you know what, you're going to use that same image on a phone layout, but you really don't want it to be very large. You can come in, this is a bit tricky, I'm going to say copy to this guy, and then I'm going to hide it on other breakpoints. So it goes away. When I go to the phone layout, I'm going to paste that second instance. For this guy, I might place a different version of the image that I know will be the right resolution for a phone layout, so a much smaller version. I'm going to go ahead and hide that on the other breakpoints. So effectively what I've done is said I can use a small version of a scale to fill image on the phone here, and on this one a higher resolution one, because the bandwidth will be better and I know they'll appreciate the higher resolution. It's worth perhaps slower load time on desktop devices. All right, I'm now flat out of time. I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks. I encourage you to come join us, or just go to the YouTube channel and check out the content, or muse.adobe.com. As usual, thanks for spending another hour with me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.